Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are going to check out another Takara Tomy figure, but this time it is not a Jurassic World release. Seems like almost every time I have a Takara Tomy figure up anymore, it's always a Jurassic World release, but it is nice to know that they do still create figures that are not Jurassic World related, and this time we have a Deinocheirus. However, as exciting as it is to see a Deinocheirus in the Takara Tomy line, I'm very intrigued to see that the coloration of their Deinocheirus is incredibly reminiscent to the Collect Day version. And for quite an extended period of time, I always just assumed that Takara Tomy had acquired permission from, I guess, Mattel or Universal or someone to distribute their figures with similar paint schemes to the Mattel ones when it comes to the Jurassic World line, like specifically the Amargasaurus. It's almost like a clone of the Mattel one when it comes to the coloration. However, the more I think about it now, it makes me wonder, because if they're going to borrow the paint scheme of the Collect Day version for their Deinocheirus, why would they not just borrow the paint schemes from the Mattel ones without permission? So again, I don't want to accuse or anything like that, but I'm starting to kind of wonder if maybe they just take the paint schemes and don't really say anything to the companies. I could be wrong. Maybe they have an agreement with Collect Day to use their paint scheme, or they just did it because, but regardless, you can't dare deny that the paint scheme of this Deinocheirus looks incredibly similar to the Collect Day version. But again, once you get past that fact, I will say that the figure looks really nice here on the packaging, and I'm beyond excited to see a Takara Tomy version of a Deinocheirus. You can also see some information up here on the top that I absolutely in no way, shape, or form can read, and then we have a nice little image here on the side, kind of, again, some more images of the Deinocheirus. We've also got a very strange image here on the back, which is also a Deinocheirus, but looks absolutely nothing like the figure itself that they had released here. And then another image over here, again, another sneak peek of the Deinocheirus. So once we actually open this up, you'll find your dinosaur here in the packaging. Oh, we also have a little card here, so maybe that's what that kind of sneak peek was there on the side. So we've got ourselves two cards, and one of which is actually in English, so that's really exciting. I did not think that that would have been in there, but you can see that we have all sorts of information on our dinosaur, and it is just a straight up cardboard card. But I don't know if they'll keep doing this in the future, but I would really love to see them do that. And then as far as our figure itself, once we pop it out of the packaging there, we kind of stand it up. And it doesn't want to stand because those cards are in the way, and I probably don't have the feet in the right spot. Got to get that tail right. Still doesn't want to stand. Maybe if we crouch it a little bit. Okay, there, it's kind of standing now. So definitely a pretty nice looking figure. I will say it looks good sculpt-wise, and the paint looks okay. The feet look like they're a bit too large, but the paint looks okay on it. Not near as nice as what we saw on the prototype there on the packaging. I just feel like the paint application looked more natural on the actual packaging, more so than what we see here on the figure in hand. But as per usual, I never expect a figure to look exactly like the prototype. That just usually doesn't happen. But again, it looks pretty good. And as far as a Takara Tomy version goes of a Deinocheirus, I really quite like it. So let's go ahead and jump straight to a closer look right now. So starting up here at the head sculpt of our Deinocheirus, you've got that very unique looking head sculpt to the dinosaur, and it actually looks really, really good. I really like the head sculpt of the dinosaur. You can see the tongue inside the mouth there, painted with a nice pinkish tone of color. You've got the nostrils right there at the tip of the snout. The coloration here is a nice dark gray, but then transitions to a nice dark red. I like the dark red, definitely really quite like that. And I feel like the dark red looks pretty good as far as the application of the paint. I just feel like the blue looks, I don't know, just a little bit too bright and maybe just not quite as natural as far as the application goes, but it still doesn't look bad. And you've got, again, a nicely painted eye with a black, and it does sport a little bit of a gloss coat to it. Really smooth transition from the gray to the red, and then from the red back to this light brown coloration. You can see that the dinosaur is really quite nicely feathered. You've got lots and lots of feather detail, especially here on the back of the head, as you have some really striking blue feathers leading off of the back of the head of the dinosaur, again before tapering off and going back to a much finer feathering throughout the course of the dinosaur. You've got some nice articulation here in the head as well. As you move down into the body, you continue to have those kind of fine feathers throughout the course of pretty much the entire Deinocheirus. As you move down into the arms, you have some pretty nice structure to the arms sculpted out, like you can kind of make out the bone structure moving down the course of the arm there. You've also got some more feathers leading off of the back of the arm there in the elbow region. That looks really nice. You've got kind of some blue on the feathers. I feel like the feathers were kind of meant to look entirely blue, but instead of doing that, they just kind of airbrushed a little bit of blue over the edges, or maybe even just paintbrushed it over there. And it's not perfectly painted, but as you move down the course of the hands, you've got some nice scoots there running down the fingers. The fingers are curled into the body, and the arms in general are held into the body in what I feel like is a pretty nice naturalistic looking way. The nails are painted with a nice dark gray. And you can see there on the opposing side now, you can see that we have that blue coloration on the underside as well as far as those feathers go. You have a nice white coloration on the underside of the dinosaur, and you can see that the detailing of the undersides of the arms also looks really quite nice. As you move back up here into the body, you can see more really nice feather detail, a little bit of girth in the stomach region of our dinosaur, so it looks nice and healthy. Then you've got that trademark appearance to the back of our Deinocheirus, and again, that area as well is painted with this bluish coloration. Detail-wise, as far as the feathers and everything go, I think it looks really nice. It's just that the blue, although really striking, I just feel like doesn't look quite as natural on this as what you see on like the Collect A version. But again, really smooth transition as we move back from that blue down again into that light brown body color, that like yellowish brown, more beautiful feather detail. Again, very fine feather detail in the leg of our Deinocheirus. As you move down, you can see the muscle definition pretty nicely in the sculpting of the thigh as well as the calf. You've got the kneecap here nicely protruding from the front of the leg there. You've also got, again, the foot sculpt similar to the hands where they have like scoots down the toes and then nicely painted nails, but I feel like the feet look a little bit too big maybe. It's hard to tell. Maybe just certain angles make it look a little bit too big. And then as we move out the course of the tail, you again see more of that nice feather detail as we lead out the length of the tail. The tail bends in an upward fashion when you put it in a nice natural positioning as far as the way it looks like it should be positioned on the figure. And then you have some nice tail feathers out here as well, which sport a little bit of white, but it's kind of inconsistent as far as the way it's painted, because the tail feathers over here have a lot of white, but then when you get over here they have more blue, so it's not perfectly painted, but it still looks okay. You've also got some of that blue on the rear of the feathers as well. And then on the underside, again, you can see we have this nice white, but that tapers off before we reach the tail. The underside of the tail remains that kind of yellowish brown. And then over here, you're not going to see too much difference, honestly, because the dinosaur isn't in any kind of like a crazy dramatic position. The dinosaur's head is pretty much straight forward. Yeah, I don't really notice any kind of a curve or anything in the neck at all. The arms are in a slightly different position, and they do not articulate, so they're held in this position. You can see the arm on this side is a little bit more forward, whereas the arm on the opposing side is held into the body a little bit further. The fingers are held in a very similar position over here as well, as they're kind of curled into the body. The legs are slightly different as far as the positioning goes. I think somewhere around there would be a natural positioning. The leg is just slightly different, but they are articulated, so it's really up to you how you want to position them. So you can move them in exactly the same position, I guess, if you would like. And then again, the sculpting and detailing aspect looks pretty much the same. The paintwork looks fairly precise throughout the course of the figure. Some areas like the tail feathers not so great, but like the nails and stuff all look to be painted pretty nicely. A little sloppiness on the middle nail right there. But for the most part, it honestly is a really nice looking Deinocheirus, and I love that Takara Tomy has been pulling out some fairly obscure species, although Deinocheirus isn't all that obscure anymore, but it's not one of your mainstream species, so it is nice to see them release figures of species like this from time to time, and this is a pretty nice one. As far as articulation goes on our figure, we do have neck articulation, so we can go down to about there, and they go up to about there. Not any type of crazy articulation, but it works fairly smoothly. We also have leg articulation, which is incredibly smooth, of course, for both legs. And then tail articulation, which can go up, down, and can also go left and right if you turn the swivel, because it can completely swivel around if you choose to do it. But the arms, I expected kind of to have articulation. They don't. I also thought for some reason that the jaw had articulation, but that as well does not. So a few articulated areas, but nothing amazing. I don't know why I, for some reason, expected more articulation on this one, because that's pretty much your standard as far as articulation goes when it comes to a Takara Tomy figure. As far as a size goes, for a length on our Deinocheirus, you're looking at about 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters, and then the height would depend on where you position the legs. So for the positioning of this spot right now, you're looking at about 2 3/4 inches or around 7 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line in comparison to our Takara Tomy Deinocheirus. And you can definitely see here in comparison to these figures that it sports a pretty small size, but if you are familiar with the Takara Tomy brand, you'll definitely know their figures are usually smaller. But for another comparison, there is the Deinocheirus in comparison to the Takara Tomy Jurassic World Stegosaurus. So if you happen to have that figure, you might have a pretty good idea, again, roughly of the size. You can see it's a little bit more sizable than the Stegosaurus, but really not by much. But for the comparison that I am personally most interested in, and we will turn the Deinocheirus around for this, we've got the Takara Tomy version in comparison to the Collect A version. So you can see the obvious and very clear inspiration. Although looking at them here, you can definitely see that there is some difference, which makes me think that maybe Collect A kind of has no idea that Takara Tomy borrowed their paint scheme, but like with the back of the head of the Collect A version, you could see the black feathers, whereas with the Takara Tomy version, we've got blue feathers for the face. There's not quite as much red on the Collect A version as there is on the Takara Tomy version. There's a stripe in the beak of the Collect A version. There is not on the Tomy version. And the tones of like the primary body color are also slightly different. It's a little bit brighter on the Takara Tomy version, whereas the brown is darker on the Collect A version. And then there's also some black on the hump on the back of the Deinocheirus on the Collect A version that is non-existent on the Takara Tomy version. That does not mean, though, that, again, this was not completely inspired paint-wise from the Collect A version, because this just might be a case of the Takara Tomy brand not wanting to use as much paintwork as what you would see on a Collect A figure, and that is a pretty common trend from them because they don't always give you the absolute most highly detailed paint applications. So in my opinion, even though there are some differences, they definitely inspired their paint from the Collect A version. I really feel like there's no questions asked about that. So this Takara Tomy Deinocheirus is another fun figure in their long line now at this point of pretty fun figures. I definitely love the Takara Tomy line. I love it more and more as they release figures and as I get more into my collection, even though there are some obvious things that like not everyone's going to like the awkward ball joint seam in the tail. It's almost at the point now where I've reviewed so many of those, I don't even remember to mention it at times, because at this point I feel like it's just almost like common knowledge that that's what they have. But they do have that somewhat awkward kind of gap in the tail because they always include that seam. I wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they would kind of get rid of that, but at the same time, it's almost part of their charm. And once you start collecting their figures and you have quite a few, you don't really notice it as much anymore. It doesn't really become much of an issue, but again, their figures would definitely look better without it. In fact, I would prefer they just ditch the articulation in areas where they need that and just stick to like the neck articulation and the legs and stuff, or arms. It would look better if they would just ditch that ball joint altogether, but at the same time, again, I'm kind of used to it at this point. But I feel like it's just something that deters people at times from purchasing the Takara Tomy figures because of that awkward gap. But as far as the figure goes, sculpt-wise, it's a really nice version of a Deinocheirus, almost kind of a clone of the Collect A version in the sculpt as well, but I feel like the Collect A version is much better than the Tomy version, but that's just kind of the way it works, because although the Takara Tomy figures look really nice, they're usually not going to end up being the best of whatever species they create. As far as the fine detailing of the sculpt goes, though, I think they did do a good job. The feather detail is really quite nice, looking nice and fine, pretty vibrant throughout the course of the figure, and all of the detailing pretty much everywhere looks really quite nice. I feel like the feet maybe look like they're a bit oversized, just a little too thick, so the feet I'm not a huge fan of, but elsewhere I think sculpt-wise it looks pretty good. The paint as well looks decent, pretty much about your standard when it comes to a Takara Tomy release. It could always be better, more naturally applied, but you don't really usually get that too often when it comes to a Takara Tomy figure, so it's kind of like the paint job that I expected. So it looks okay, pretty nice flashy paint application, but just could have been a little bit more naturally applied, like just maybe a little bit more depth to the paint jobs of these Takara Tomy figures could make a difference, like washes or something over them could really amp up the beauty. But as far as, again, what a standard Takara Tomy figure looks like paint-wise, I feel like it falls right in that same trend. But then again, they should also be thanking Collect A for their paint scheme when it comes to this figure. But as a whole, it's a pretty fun release. Not the best that Takara Tomy has ever released, but definitely a fun one and a really cool species for them to have chosen to create. So if you are interested in this, I will include a link in the description to where I purchased mine on AliExpress. So if you are interested, make sure you check that link, head on over there and pick yourself up this very cool Deinocheirus, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.